Welcome to another CHRO Conversation hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Scott Weisberg, Chief People Officer and a member of the Executive Council for Wendy's, the world's third largest quick service hamburger company, which includes more than 6,500 franchise and company restaurants in over 30 countries around the world. Scott, thank you very much for joining us today. We sincerely appreciate it. As a CHRO, can you tell us a little bit about what's unique about being a CHRO as part of the executive leadership team compared to maybe some of the other functions?
Yeah, I think that if one way to look at the role of the CHRO is to look at the various different teams or roles that you end up playing. So I would say that the first and foremost, what I tend to think about is that I am a senior leadership team member. So while I'm the head of HR, I'm sitting on a business team, and we're making enterprise-wide decisions for the Wendy's brand, which is a $10 billion brand with over 6,500 restaurants in several countries around the world. And there are strategy decisions that we all make, and even though we have a functional specialty, we're responsible for weighing in on all those decisions from every single angle. So that's the first role that I play. The second role that I play is as function leader. And that has a purpose both within the company in terms of leading the HR professionals and coming up with an agenda to bring the business strategy to life. But within a corporation like Wendy's, where we have 400 franchisees and 95% of our restaurants are owned by those franchisees, I'm putting together that agenda to bring that strategy to life that can be executed, and we can support franchisees as well as the HR business partners throughout the company. There's a role that I play as manager with the human resource leadership team. And so, again, there are management aspects that I play with those folks. And then I would say that there are two other roles that the HR leader plays that's somewhat unique. One is what I call consigliere, or a confidant to the CEO. And then I would say that it's also a unique relationship with the board. And so particularly when it comes to executive pay decisions and when it comes to matters of CEO succession, you're the one player on the team that is both confidant to the CEO, but also an advisor to the board. And how you play all those roles builds trust and your relative effectiveness.
What are some of the largest strategic obstacles that Wendy's happens to be facing right now?
Yeah, this is a time of significant challenge for what I would call the QSR, or quick service restaurant sector of restaurant companies. We've been fortunate in the past few years in that commodity costs, which are input costs, have been relatively stable or down. But now we're seeing significant inflation there. What we're also seeing is that labor costs are accelerating quite dramatically, and that's because our competitors in other industries are elevating their wages, as well as certain municipalities are elevating wages. And when you think of the pressure that puts on our partners or our franchisees that are small business owners, they're really feeling their margins challenged. And that happens to be going on at a time when I think that we're experiencing kind of a barbell economy. And there are people that are desperately shopping our particular segment in the restaurant industry looking for low price. So what that's going to drive people into our restaurants is low pricing. And yet what the franchisees and what the company restaurant operators are experiencing are higher input costs, right? And then what we also know is that the reason why people will come to a restaurant is that they look good. And about 40% of our restaurants have been what we call image activated. But that means 60% need some capital investment to look better. And we also know that people are leveraging technology more and more for ordering and for experiencing the brand in a different way, and that requires investment as well. So I would say that this is a business proposition problem, and it's a leap of faith that a restaurant operator would cut costs down when input costs are rising, betting on the volume leverage that ultimately will lead to a successful business proposition. So when you think about what HR is there to help do is, first thing that we look at is our work systems. And so what we've actually done recently is we've changed our management staffing model to bring about greater line of sight to the critical tasks that need to be done. And we can do it with a better developmental path that helps our young restaurant managers learn, as well as be more effective on the job and do it for less money. We also are looking at those work systems in the back of the restaurant in terms of where to use potential automation that actually elevates the experience of the employee and makes it a better place to work, and at the same time takes costs out, as well as mobile ordering, as well as kiosk ordering in the front of the restaurant, so we can use our employees to support the customer experience in other ways rather than some of these tasks. And that's important. What we're seeing in the industry right now is about 168% turnover. And now that's off of a very high historical base of about 100% annualized a year. But I think that we're going to have to continue to push for ways to make our jobs more desirable to keep that turnover in check.
So it's interesting because a lot of what you talked about there were issues that people would not necessarily associate with HR. And even when you talked about HR helping redesign programs, including thinking about more automation, we don't normally think of that as part of the HR job. So can you just say a little bit more about how HR might be driving those changes?
I don't know if we drive all of them. I think what ends up driving them is the need to take advantage of available technology or the need to actually drive down costs. And then I think that it's the HR role to be an architect, to think of how do you modify the work systems to make that happen in the most effective way. And I think that that's the role that we play. And so you can be a player on the front end to identify the need. You can be a little bit further downstream to, once the need has been identified, to determine the how. Or you can be involved even further downstream in terms of working with the relative management team and the technology to come up with ways for the change management to go more effectively and smoothly. Either way, you're going to be involved in some segment of that or potentially all of it.
I once heard you say that you hire for potential. Can you share a little bit about what that means to you?
I believe that for virtually every level, at least deeper in the organization as you're developing talent, it's better to hire for capability and train for skill. So, for example, I have a belief that we can hire for raw customer service aptitude and skills, and somebody that's got positive energy and a great work ethic, and that likes to interact with people, and we can teach them how to actually build sandwiches or take orders on a register. I think that that's true, though, as well for entry-level jobs. I think that if you're hiring someone for raw capability, and thinking about can you project them into jobs 1, 2, or 3 levels above what you're hiring them for, it creates a much better success rate and it builds a bench for potential talent. So then you might ask, well, what does it look like to hire for potential? And I could give you competency speak and give you lots of words, but I've simplified it really into 4 various areas. I say that that's smart, mature, motivated, and either courageous or centered is the last one. And when I talk about smart, it's not just book smart. What I think of is incisiveness. We all know that there are people that tend to be successful, that tend to be on the right issue no matter where they're working. They anticipate what is the right thing to do and where to go. That's what I consider smart. They've got good instincts and they always seem to be on the right topic. The second is maturity, and I think that maturity is critically important because it's linked to this whole idea of not being defensive when you make mistakes. So that idea to get negative feedback, incorporate it when you realize that you've made an error, and not be defensive in the face of criticism is critically important, because that's what helps you to grow from those experiences. And you've got to be mature to be able to, in the face of criticism or negative feedback, continue to grow. Obviously, motivation, if you've got two people that are equal levels of smart, equal levels of mature, but one is just more motivated than the other, they're going to get more times at the bat. They're going to make more mistakes. They're going to incorporate that feedback, and they're going to continue to learn from it more times. And if you think about that day over day, week over week, month over month, year over year, you see that the person that is more driven is going to have significant more experience and learning over the course of a career. And then finally, I talk about courageous or centered, because particularly for management and leadership jobs, sometimes you have to address areas that people would rather not hear about, whether it's somebody that's working for you. Sometimes you need to wrestle with conflict with a peer, and sometimes you need to be courageous and tell the boss that maybe their idea isn't worth pursuing. And it is amazing to me how many people shy away from those discussions, and as a result, you don't actually work the issue that needs to be worked, or you don't address the problems that really need to be addressed, and the organization is less effective. So I find that over the course of time, and it's not fail-safe, but if you had to bet on only four things, I go to smart, mature, motivated, and courageous.
And you think that those work for this hiring for potential, using those four key attributes, that is useful across the whole organization from hiring? I mean, you talked about a little bit at the entry level and in the store, but really everywhere, you're saying.
I think that it is. I think that that's very, very helpful. You can probably get away with motivated and mature and at the entry level, but as you're looking for bets to make, particularly for leadership talent, I think that you want to bet on those four. It's a pretty good set of bets.
That sounds like it.
Yeah.
So being the chief people officer at an organization like Wendy's with a number of franchises must create a number of really unique and interesting opportunities and challenges. Can you share what some of those might be?
The thing that makes it exciting to interact with franchisees is that franchisees are independent business owners, which means they make their own hiring decisions. They make their own decisions around promotion and termination. And so it's not our job as the franchisor to actually elevate their human resource organization. What we're responsible for is to make it easy for their respective human resource organizations to get better organizational outcomes and human capital outcomes. And I think that we can do that by providing systems, processes, tools available to them, either through third parties or creating venues where they're picking them up with each other. So really what we're responsible for is a learning environment that elevates the actual human capital capability of a $10 billion, 200,000 person enterprise. So when I think about motivating the HR talent within Wendy's, I think that that's an easy thing to do, because I think that at the heart of why people tend to get into HR, it's that they want to make an impact. the best HR people I've ever seen, whether it's very apparent or whether it's a little bit more subtle or nuanced, can't stand the idea of putting their feet in the sand and not making prints, right? And the idea and the notion that you can come up with training curriculum that's going to be helpful for 200,000 employees is ultimately exciting, and I think that's what gets us up in the morning.
So it's been really interesting because now a couple of times you've talked about the tremendous responsibilities and all the hats you have, but having to influence without having necessarily a lot of power. You were talking about that in terms of the executive leadership team, and now that's very similar with the franchises where you have to help them develop their own talent, but they're independent, so you can't push and force policies on them necessarily. So how do you do that? How do you manage to help them develop talent, develop their processes from an influence perspective more than a hammer perspective?
I think that in today's world we're seeing this more now than ever before. Good ideas take off, bad ideas don't. So I once had a boss early in my career saying, you know, if you're working really hard to push an idea, maybe you ought to step back and think about whether or not the idea is that good, right? And I think that what I find with our franchisees, they're really hungry for solutions that work. And so again, if we can facilitate those ideas, those processes, those systems that work, I think that that's a winner for everybody. And if I'm finding that we're pushing an idea too much, what I should be doing is probably listening a little bit harder about why this isn't working for somebody. And when you solve those problems, usually the idea takes off.
Hey, Scott, thank you very much for joining us. The wisdom you've shared with us, as always, is extraordinarily interesting to me, and I think will be very helpful for HR professionals and MHR students going forward. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated the opportunity.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Scott Weisberg of Wendy's shared his perspective about how to drive business success through identifying and motivating talent. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Masters of Human Resource program here at the University of South Carolina and the Center for Executive Succession, thank you for joining us.